integrating qualitative and quantitative methods. Each type of methodology has its own advantages and disadvantages. Quantitative methods allow us to summarize vast sources of information and facilitate comparisons across categories and over time. Comparisons are necessary to evaluate improvement, a critical criterion for community intervention and funding agencies. However, quantitative methodologies can be quite complex and require considerable investment for proper understanding and use. Community members and undergraduates, etc., may tune out elaborate statistics, creating difficulties in the utilization of the products of research. Critics of quantitative methods have also commented that it is difficult to get the real meaning of an issue by looking at its numbers. Aggregate statistics are a relatively recent arrival in human history, which might explain our difficulties in comprehending probabilities and other statistical phenomena. It is apparent that we must devise ways of translating statistical information into a form comprehensible to our target audiences. Qualitative description provides a rich flavor for issues and circumstances. Some psychologists have suggested that people organize their experiences in the form of narratives. It certainly seems reasonable to suggest that one may have a better understanding of a community member's situation by reading a descriptive passage than just by looking at demographic statistics. However, it may be difficult to generate substantial project funding or otherwise convince others of the value of an intervention based on a few anecdotes. Qualitative and quantitative methods can be used in a single study to offer the advantages of both perspectives and overcome the limitations of each. Let us talk about the assumptions of qualitative and quantitative research. These evaluations in combination can produce a more holistic view of the phenomenon, but must reconcile some assumptions. There is not a single set of instructions for the design of a fixed method study. Rather, there is a guiding principle, the philosophy of pragmatism. A philosophy underlies each methodological approach. For mixed methods, there is a philosophy which is called pragmatism. You can see the table here. We are comparing the quantitative research with the qualitative research. The quantitative research has a deductive approach. It is testing of theory, whereas in the qualitative research, on the contrary, has the inductive approach. There is a generation of theory. In quantitative research, there is one objective reality. Social reality is something objective and measurable. Whereas in the qualitative research, there are as many realities as there are actors or participants. Social reality is a concept which is something which is constructed by people. The quantitative research follows a natural science model, particularly positivism, whereas the qualitative research is interpretative. Quantitative research has a context which is less important in examining a phenomenon. But in qualitative research, Context is of paramount importance in examining a phenomenon. In quantitative research, the researcher's biases are controlled via careful statistical methods. But in qualitative research, the researcher's biases are a necessary component of results interpretation. In quantitative research, the results are more valuable when analyzing large populations across which we can generalize the results. Whereas in the qualitative research, results give more depth and meaning when analyzing smaller samples. According to Victor Lofgren, pragmatists consider the research question to be more important than either the method or the worldview that is supposed to underlie the method. Such a way of thinking enables the researcher greater flexibility. With that kind of flexibility, however, comes the responsibility to ensure that your research is rigorous. Pool and organize the data and literature at your disposal, and you draw from this information the most appropriate question to research. Note that the philosophy of pragmatism does not have the support mixed methods design. The pragmatist would be free to complete a quantitative only or qualitative only study if the research question calls for it. Now, why do we use mixed methods research? While quantitative and qualitative studies certainly have a place on their own, mixed methods research can, in certain situations, provide a better view of reality than quantitative or qualitative methods alone. According to Green, there are 5 primary purposes for mixing the methods in research. Number 1 is triangulation. The use of multiple methods concurrently and with equal weight to test the validity of a finding seeks convergence, corroboration, correspondence of results from different methods. Complementarity. The use of multiple methods concurrently and preferably with equal weight to clarify the results of a finding, that is, seeks elaboration, enhancement, illustration, clarification of the results, one method with the results of the other methods. Expansion. The use of multiple methods sequentially or concurrently and with equal or unequal priority or weight to enhance the richness of a finding seeks to extend the breadth and range of inquiry by using different methods for different inquiry components. Next is development. The use of additional methods sequentially, preferably with equal weight, to shape future research processes, that is, seeks to use the result from one method to help develop or inform the other method, where development is broadly constructed to include sampling and implementation as well as measurement decisions. Next is initiation. The use of multiple methods concurrently and preferably with equal weight to stimulate new questions. It seeks to discovery of paradox and contradictions, new perspectives of frameworks, the recasting of questions or results from one method with questions or results from the other method. Let us now talk about the advantages and disadvantages of mixed method research. Ideally, we would use mixed methods research whenever and wherever it is possible. since it is often better because it captures the richness of the real world than either the qualitative or the quantitative methods alone. There are course questions of feasibility. Because both methods are being used, there can be greater cost and time requirements. Success can also be dependent upon the extent of existing research on that particular subject. The various advantages and disadvantages are as follows. The disadvantages to begin with would be that firstly, it requires the knowledge in both methods. Secondly, there is a requirement of more extensive data collection and resources. It also might lead to collection of an overwhelming amount of data. And when the data is overwhelming, certainly it's going to be difficult to interpret the conflicting results. The last disadvantage could be that it is critiqued by methodological purists for paradigm mixing. Let's now talk about the advantages. It utilizes the strength of both the approaches. Secondly, it provides a more comprehensive view. Another advantage could be that it does not limit the data being collected. The researcher can generate and test a grounded theory. There is also increased generalizability. Another advantage could be that it provides stronger evidence for a conclusion through convergence and corroboration. Let's now talk about combining participatory methods and GIS mapping to understand community. Let's start with the example A, which is the combining of participatory methods and GIS mapping to understand the community. Researchers combined ethnographic, participatory and GIS methods as part of a randomized controlled study on the effectiveness of community-based HIV awareness and prevention strategies within 48 communities in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, South Africa and Thailand. Prior to intervention in each of the communities, the multilingual and transnational team of researchers needed to work with members of each the communities to identify number 1, the community's boundaries, number 2, how the community was defined socially and geographically, number 3, where to deliver the services, and number 4, individual, groups and community networks with whom to partner in delivering services. GIS technologies were used to generate maps of the geographic area and relevant communities' sites. Yet, in order to identify and define community resources, ethnographic and participatory methods were needed to complement and extend the GIS technologies. For example, participatory mapping and transect walks were held in a rural community in South Africa so that the community members could describe the community as they have experienced it. Facilitators worked with community teams to create maps, usually on the grounds outdoors with natural materials such as sticks, leaves and stones. Community members identified such features as community landmarks, infrastructure, transport routes, places for livelihood and dwelling, and boundaries. Maps were transferred to charts by community members for record keeping. Transect walks were then conducted with community members, serving as guides to explore key community networks and resources in greater detail. The participatory process complemented and challenged quantitative descriptions generated by outsiders. Multiple methods illuminated key differences between the mental maps of communities, maps generated by government surveys, and census data. A multi-method approach more effectively named community boundaries, challenges, strengths, and resources than any one research method alone. Let's move on to example B. A mixed method evaluation of peer support for early adolescents. Louis Ellis, Herbert Marsh, and Rhonda Craven integrated quantitative and qualitative methods to evaluate a peer support program in Australia for school children making the transition to adolescence and high school. The peer support program is one that is widely implemented in Australia, with over 1,600 schools adopting the program in New South Wales, including the metropolitan region of Sydney. The program was offered as a set of 12 once-a-week sessions in which high school seniors who received initial and ongoing training and support worked with small groups of 7th grade students. The groups discussed and practiced goal setting, decision making, problem solving, and developing support networks. The quantitative component of the evaluation included a sample of 930 students from 3 high schools. In the first year of the longitudinal study, all 7th grade students were assigned to the within school baseline control group. Researchers collected data at 3 points from the beginning to the end of the school year. In the second year, new 7th grade students from the same 3 schools participated in the peer support program. As with the control group, data was collected at 3 points from the beginning to the end of the school year. Surveys measured the students' self-concept, that is, the physical abilities, relationships, and academic abilities, personal effectiveness, that is, the self-confidence and leadership, coping, and perceptions of bullying. Results for the experimental group were compared with the control group and with the experimental group's own baseline data. Multi-level path analysis indicated that the program enhanced psychological well-being and adjustment, and that some benefits emerged after a time lapsed at the end of the program and were stronger over time. Researchers found the sleeper effect surprising, given the steady loss of benefits once many interventions had been concluded. The qualitative component, designed to privilege the personal perspectives of participants, including open-ended questionnaires and focus groups with 7th grade student and peer support leaders. Content analysis showed themes that were not fully named or examined in the researcher-designed surveys. For example, the strongest finding that emerged was that the program helped strengthen student connectedness and understanding of others. Students also emphasized how the program helped them deal with difficult situations and fostered a sense of possibility for their own futures. Mixed method strengthened the study, providing complementary evidence and allowing for participants' voices to be included. Moving on to example C, participatory action research on the impact of mental health consumer-run organizations. Researchers in Ontario, Canada, worked with stakeholders to conduct a mixed method participatory action research project focusing on consumer-run mental health organizations that offered mutual support but also advocated for social change. The organizations called Consumer or Survivor Initiatives, that is CSI, in Ontario focused on multiple levels in their work for systems change. They worked to impact local services, that is, the mental health, health services and planning bodies policy, example, the Provincial Ministry of Health, mental health umbrella organizations, and society, example, public media, educational institutions. The purpose of the research project was to assess the kind of work that CSIs in Ontario were doing and to evaluate changes in local services, policies and society due to the work of the CSIs. The participatory action research approach included a number of components. CSI members were included in developing the study proposal. 14 CSI members were hired, trained and supported as co-researchers. A stakeholder steering committee was formed and guided each step of the study. The research team also provided ongoing feedback to the CSIs in popular accessible formats. The evaluators used quantitative and qualitative components to achieve triangulation of findings. They used quantitative methods to get at breadth and causal impacts. They also developed a tracking tool, a spreadsheet that logged all the system level activities and outcomes of the CSIs over a 25-month period. Researchers found a total of 665 events over the 25 months of the study, and the most frequently used strategy for social change was community planning. Ahead of public education, political advocacy and action research strategies. The research team utilized qualitative methods to get an in-depth insight into the experiences of the CSI members and organizations as a whole. These methods included key informant interviews and focus groups. These methods proved more effective for pinpointing outcomes of the CSI social change activities, such as successfully advocating for increased subsidized housing units and hiring peer support workers in a local hospital. Interestingly, the participatory component of the evaluation became an intervention in itself, as those involved in the research had the opportunity to engage in regular reflection on systems change. The CSI researchers and steering committee developed a common language for talking about the important work they were doing. Their reflexivity helped them think about how they would be more strategic and collaborative in the future. For example, the steering committee developed a 20-minute professionally produced DVD for CSIs to use in advocacy, education, and planning. They also held a series of regional workshops with the CSIs to explore further action together. Participatory processes and mixed methods helped to capture the impact of the CSIs, but it also extended their impact. In conclusion, we can say that the quantitative and the qualitative methods are not mutually exclusive techniques. Not only can one use multiple methodologies in the same research project, one may even be able to synthesize quantitative and qualitative approaches to gain the benefits of both techniques and reduce the drawbacks. There are several ways to combine quantitative and qualitative techniques. They range in ease and complexity. One basic approach would be to generate areas of concern from a focus group. For example, neighborhood residents could respond to quantitative items on how well public transportation operates in their neighborhood and how important this issue is to them. Residents also could describe some of their experiences with public transportation. The research team could then examine the distribution of responses and select a few passages representative of various viewpoints across the spectrum. For a more sophisticated approach, one could use the frequency of each type of statements and create a few prototypical responses with statements in proportion to their occurrences in the larger sample. This would enable readers to gain an understanding of the variety of perspectives without having to read hundreds of passages. This technique could also be used to sort evaluative statements along the dimension of positivity and negativity. One may also create a correlation matrix for the appearance of statements to determine how beliefs are interrelated. There is a false dichotomy between using either the quantitative or qualitative methods. Our research projects would be strengthened by making use of the range of available methods. Quantitative methods facilitate an understanding of the distribution of views in the population, which would be quite useful in a needs assessment of the community. These techniques are available in evaluation of interventions and other types of comparisons. Qualitative methods, on the other hand, allow one to capture the subtle nuances of a situation and present information in a way that the general population can relate to. Combining quantitative and qualitative techniques would provide a comprehensive description of an issue in a format that can be easily digested by a diverse body of stakeholders. Integrating quantitative and qualitative research methods in community research can be very helpful. Let us summarize. Qualitative and quantitative methods yield complementary forms of useful knowledge. The combined use offers the advantage of both perspectives and overcomes the limitations of each. Mixed research helps in processes like triangulation, complementarity, expansion, development, and initiation. Choice of methods must depend on the question to be answered in the research. Both qualitative and quantitative methods can be used in participatory collaborative community research. Multiple methods often strengthen a specific study. Contextual and longitudinal perspectives often strengthen community research. Community psychology is best served by a diversity of forms of knowledge and methods of research.